welcome back to the Unseen Podcast, a podcast dedicated to missing people, unresolved cases, and UK true crime. Today we're going to be discussing the awful murder of Jenny Ronaldson in 1980. Her death came as a shock to everyone, and it was so out of the blue that no one could understand it. As the years passed, there will be much speculation as to whether some suspects already known to police had been involved with it. However, Jenny's murder remains unsolved. This episode contains descriptions that some listeners may find distressing, including discussion about sexual assault and rape, so listener discretion is advised. The Isle of Dogs is a large peninsula which is located in East London and is surrounded on three sides by different districts, including Canary Wharf, which is the heart of the capital's business district. The Isle of Dogs is located in a meander in the River Thames, and there is debate as to where it gained its distinctive name. However, mentions of it do date back hundreds of years. The area itself is very diverse, and there's a severe amount of social inequality that can be seen there. There are many very wealthy areas and people due to the business district, but it's also at one time had the highest concentration of social housing in England. On the 24th of November 1980, something else occurred in the Isle of Dogs which caused a certain amount of shock and intrigue. That day, something was spotted floating in the river, and the scene didn't look right. It was found to be the body of a woman, and when the body was later retrieved, it was clear that this woman had been the victim of a vicious and brutal attack. She was found to have been gagged, bound, and it looked as though she had been beaten. This was a horrendous recovery, and there was an immediate murder investigation launched. It was clear that whatever had happened to this woman, she'd been killed in some horrendous circumstances. Police began investigating the scene and trying to work out who this victim could be. Without an identity, trying to figure out what had happened to her and who did it would be difficult. This is often the case with unidentified person cases, and many of these people are found in bodies of water. Therefore, it's crucial that this woman be identified. The police did have some clues, however, as when they scoured missing person reports from the area in the time before the discovery, they noticed a young woman who fit a similar description to the woman that had been found. 19-year-old Jenny Ronaldson had disappeared sometime after the 26th of October 1980, around a month before the body had been recovered. She had still not been located, and so police began to look into whether this could be her. After further investigation and analysis, a positive identification was made. The woman was Jenny Ronaldson. This discovery was shocking as she'd been viciously attacked, and when she was found she had a gag in her mouth and was wearing just a bra. Police suspected that the attack had been sexually motivated. This was later confirmed as it was found that Jenny had been raped. Following a post-mortem, the coroner reported on her death certificate that her cause of death was due to asphyxia, gagging, and constriction of the neck. How had this happened though, and why? The brutality of the attack seemed incongruent with the victim. Jenny was an unlikely victim, which is why when she went missing at the end of October, her friends and family were immediately worried. Jenny has been described as a reliable, quiet and unassuming person according to those that knew her. She was also hard-working and was building a career for herself in the capital. She worked as a nurse at Guy's Hospital, a well-known hospital located in Southwark in central London. It's been widely known as a teaching hospital and has history dating back to 1721. Many well-esteemed people have worked at Guy's Hospital at one time or another, and by all accounts Jenny was happy to be working there. She has been described as being devoted to her job and despite her young age was dedicated to her profession. It was at Guy's Hospital that she'd last been seen by anyone. Jenny's colleagues later reported that she was last seen in the staff canteen at the hospital on Sunday the 26th of October at around 2 p.m. She was in there having a cup of tea and told her colleagues that she planned on going for a sightseeing trip to Petticoat Lane now that she had finished work. Petticoat Lane is located in the East End of London in the Spitalfields area and has long been known for its market stalls. It's the location of the oldest and most famous market stalls in London, and they sell many different types of objects from clothes to fruit and vegetables. It's thought that the name may have come from the fact that during the 1600s, many street names were named after what was sold there, which in this case was petticoats. The area therefore has a historical attraction for many people, and this still continues today. While Petticoat Lane itself doesn't now exist, the Petticoat Lane Market does, and many people still visit the markets there, as well as the Spitalfield markets and Brick Lane nearby. It would not have been seen as unusual then when Jenny explained that she wanted to visit the markets that Sunday, and so her colleagues didn't think much about it. Having left work that day, her colleagues never saw her again. There didn't appear to be anything to suggest that there was anything unusual about that day, and this was the thing that seemed so strange. What had happened after Jenny had left work? A 40-man detective squad, which was led by Chief Superintendent William Humphreys, was put on the case, and they immediately began to try and track down anyone that knew anything about Jenny or what had happened that day. The police appealed for anyone that may have noticed Jenny on the 26th of October when she disappeared. Particularly, they were interested in finding anyone that had seen her after 2:30 p.m. when it was known that she had left the hospital. The police were also interested in any information that they could get about how Jenny's purse and glasses had ended up in the Thames, close to Wapping waterfront, 9 days after her disappearance. Before Jenny's body had been recovered, these items had been found. The police wanted to know how exactly they got there and the circumstances surrounding their discovery. Wapping is located around 3 miles from the Isle of Dogs, where Jenny's body had eventually been found. Where had Jenny's body been put into the river, and how exactly had this been done? Where had Jenny encountered her killer? Police decided to employ a strategy which had been done in other cases, usually with the help of a female police officer. In this case, they were able to ask Jenny's twin sister Linda to take part in a reconstruction of events and retrace Jenny's steps that day that she had left work. Linda was at university in Hull, and she agreed to be part of the reconstruction and walked with police tracing the same journey. They came out of Guy's Hospital entrance and then went down St Thomas's Street. Jenny's journey route wasn't exactly known, however it's clear that if Jenny was planning on heading to Petticoat Lane Market, then she would have headed across London Bridge and crossed the Thames into Whitechapel and the Spitalfields area. This would have placed her on the same side of the Thames that her glasses, purse and body were eventually found. The walk to the market would have taken around half an hour, and the location would suggest that she did make it to the market that day. There is little that has been published about what was known to police, or even if Jenny did walk the entire distance that day. There has been nothing published to suggest if she got on a tube, or if she travelled there in any other way. The lack of concrete evidence in this case no doubt hindered progress early on. Jenny's twin sister wanted to be involved with the reconstruction and stated at the time, "I felt this had to be done. I think you've got to try and switch yourself off during the reconstruction, otherwise it could become too distressing." She added she would be happy to see whoever did this locked away so he can't do any more damage. Hopefully seeing me today may have jogged someone's memory. It was hoped that this retracing of Jenny's steps would indeed jog someone's memory and that someone may remember seeing her that day. Jenny's family were devastated by what had happened to her, and they, like everyone else, couldn't understand why anyone would have wanted to kill her. Jenny's parents, Peter and Margaret, were living in Kenya at the time that Jenny was murdered, and they immediately travelled over to London. They also appealed to the public for their help to try and figure out what had happened. Peter said, "Any member of the public who saw or recall anything should come forward. At the time, it might not have meant anything, but in retrospect, it might come back." Margaret echoed this, saying, "Anyone who has any ideas at all who think that they may have seen something suspicious that Sunday should please contact police." The issue that police had was that there didn't appear to be anyone that saw anything suspicious that day, and information was not as forthcoming as they hoped it would be. Jenny had left work in the middle of the day in the busiest city in the UK, and it seemed that someone had murdered her and dumped her body in the River Thames without anyone noticing anything. This must have been a source of frustration for everyone involved. The other frustrating thing for police was that this case seemed to be a stranger murder, which it was known was one of the most difficult to solve. Any progress on the case seemed to slow as 1980 turned into 1981, and the detectives were still at a loss for what could have happened. The lines of inquiry didn't seem to be leading anywhere. In April 1981, a Thames report on the TV discussed Jenny's case and explained that at that time there had been a series of other unreported attacks on women in the area. Were these attacks linked to Jenny's? This wasn't known, however it was a line of inquiry that detectives were looking into at the time. The brutality of the crime was a concern, and it was clear from the outset that police were worried about this perpetrator possibly striking again, or that this person had already attacked women before. Detective Chief Superintendent William Humphreys said at the time, "The danger is that someone who commits this savage type of murder may strike again." This was the concern, however months passed, and then this turned into years, and Jenny's murder remained unsolved. Whoever had committed this murder seemed to have got away with it. Jenny's murder was left to the occasional case review and the hope that someone would come forward with information that would finally answer what happened to her. It wasn't until 2001 that newspapers once again began reporting on Jenny's case. This time the headlines read, "The Thriller Killers was Nurse in River Murder Number 4. This was a startling headline, and emerging from the uncertainty of Jenny's case came some possible suspects: David Mulcahy and John Duffy. During 1982 and 83, 19 women were attacked and sexually assaulted in and around North London. These women were attacked at night and close to railway stations. These rapes continued in 1984, and it's reported that 3 women were raped on the same night in 1985 in Hendon, North East London. These attacks were taken very seriously by the Metropolitan Police, and Operation Heart was launched to try and track down who could be committing these attacks. The women were all describing very similar circumstances. They had been attacked by 2 men. One of these men was short with ginger hair, and the other man was larger. It appeared that these attacks were linked, and that these 2 men were working together to commit many of these crimes. The police were extremely interested in tracking down these 2 men, and they did have some evidence from the attacks. The evidence was subject to blood grouping analysis, however this analysis was not as precise as later DNA technology and could only allocate the blood group of the suspect. The issue with this was that this blood group could apply to many different people in the population, and so could not be used to accurately discover who these perpetrators were. On the 29th of December 1985, the murder of Alison Day brought the rape investigation and now a murder investigation together, Alison's case was later featured on Crime Watch, and the reconstruction shows the eerie events surrounding her initial disappearance and later the discovery of her body. Alison had been travelling from her home in Romford in East London to Hackney Wick, also in East London. The area was relatively industrial, and Alison's fiancé worked at a printer's in the area. Many of the businesses were shut down for the Christmas period, but Alison's fiancé was working that day, and he'd phoned her to see whether she wanted to come and give him some company that night. She agreed and set out, catching the tube and the train to get there. The journey was relatively short, however when Alison got to Hackney Wick, she may have found herself a little confused as to how to get to the printers from the station. Alison hadn't visited her fiancé at work before. The Crime Watch reconstruction stated that Alison may have used a phone box to ring a taxi company, however this is unclear. A woman did ring a taxi company from that location, but never identified herself as Alison Day. Whatever the circumstances were, Alison never arrived at the printers to see her fiancé. She simply disappeared until 17 days later her body was found in the nearby River Lee. She had been weighed down with stones in her pockets, and her blouse had been ripped into 3 pieces, and it was used to gag and bind her. The 3rd piece was then used to strangle her. It was unclear who had committed this at the time, and Crime Watch was used as a way to try and appeal for more information. The proximity to a train station and the evidence of a brutal sexual assault, however, made police believe that this murder could be in some way related to the other sexual assaults that had been happening in other areas of London. There was no evidence presented for this at the time, however the newspapers began to change the name of the railway rapist, which they had given to the perpetrators of the previous assaults, to the railway killers. On April the 17th, 1986, another shocking murder was committed, this time close to West Horsley Station in Surrey. 15-year-old Marcia Tamboza's body was found in some woods, and it was badly charred. It was clear that she had also been raped and strangled, and then an attempt had been made to burn her body. Marcia had been riding her bike to buy some sweets from a shop near West Horsley Station when she was attacked. Her watch had stopped at 5:35 p.m, and this gave police an indication of when this had occurred. The location of her murder close to another station was again a possible link to the same perpetrators. There was also something else that linked the murders of Alison Day and Marcia Tamboza. A fact that wasn't released to the public, but that was kept back, was the way in which both women had been strangled. A tourniquet had been fashioned, and in Marcia's case, a piece of wood had been left at the scene next to the body. This led police to believe that the same killer had murdered Marcia. Unlike Alison's murder, though, there was forensic evidence recovered from her body. Police had a sample of DNA from the killer, and it was revealed that the man responsible was blood group A and that he was a secretor, meaning that he biologically secreted blood into other bodily fluids, like saliva, and in this case, semen. Despite only having the blood group, it would help to narrow down a list of suspects, and police set about trying to find out who was responsible for this by using an early version of the Holmes database. The Home Office large major inquiry system, which was set up to cross-reference information from across the country. This eventually linked the forensic profile to a rape in central London, which was unsolved. Through tracking down as many of these suspects as possible, they finally managed to narrow it down to one name: John Duffy. John Duffy was known to police for being violent towards his wife, and he'd been arrested in 1986 for following a woman in a park. When he was arrested, items related to Marcia's murder were discovered, and other victims of rape began to come forward. In 1988, he was charged with 3 murders and several rapes. The third murder charge came from the murder of Anne Locke in May 1986. Anne had been at work as a secretary at London Weekend Television on May 18, 1986, and had travelled from King's Cross Station to Brookman's Park Station in Hertfordshire at around 9:45 p.m. This was a well-known commuter train which Anne got on regularly. When she didn't return home, her newlywed husband called police to report her missing. A large-scale search began, but they couldn't seem to locate Anne. Her family began to fear the worst, and it wasn't until 9 weeks later that her body was found. Despite large-scale searches done in the area around Brookman's Park Station, railway workers found her body on an embankment with her hands tied behind her back and a sock in her mouth to gag her. It was clear that she had been murdered and believed to be strangled, but police couldn't get any more forensic evidence from her body due to the severe decomposition and weeks out in the open. There were similarities to the previous murders, however, and particularly her proximity to a train station. John Duffy was charged with Anne's murder as well as Alison and March's. John Duffy was eventually convicted of 2 murders and 4 rapes. He was convicted of Alison and March's, but not Anne's. This was due to the lack of forensic evidence that had been recovered from Anne's body, given the amount of time that had elapsed between her disappearance and her body's discovery. This was no doubt disappointing for both the police and Anne's family, who believed that John Duffy was responsible for her murder. John Duffy was sent to prison, and this is the way that the cases stayed. However, police were sure that John Duffy had not acted alone. Many of the rape victims had described 2 men involved with the attacks, and given the circumstances surrounding the murders, they knew that John Duffy could not have committed them alone. While in prison, Duffy began to speak to a forensic psychologist, and he eventually began to admit there was someone else involved with the attacks. He didn't explain who this other person was to begin with, but then eventually gave them a name: David Mulcahy. Duffy and Mulcahy were childhood friends, having attended Havelock School in North London together. From an early age, they were committing crimes together, and Duffy explained to police that he and Mulcahy began what they called hunting together, looking for women to attack. This eventually escalated into murdering some of the women that they had attacked. The pair had a ruse where one man would approach the woman and the other man would then grab her. They became very skilled at it, as John Duffy would explain. He also explained in detail about Anne Locke's murder, saying that he and Mulcahy had committed it. Duffy could now not be tried for her murder due to double jeopardy laws, however he could be for her rape. Mulcahy was now in the police sights, and he could be charged with all 3 murders and the rapes based on Duffy's testimony. They did end up connecting Mulcahy to the crimes in other ways too. He was put under police surveillance for several months before being arrested in 1999. Mulcahy was a married father of 4 at that time, and police got a conclusive conclusion when DNA linked him to the evidence that they already had. Mulcahy denied all charges at trial and said he was innocent. However, he was eventually convicted of all 3 murders, 7 rapes, and was given a whole life sentence. John Duffy was subsequently convicted of the 7 rapes that he had confessed to, and he received an additional 12 years added on to his life sentence. The news of the 2 men's arrests and the crimes that they had committed over the years caused shockwaves across the country. The way in which the men had worked together to hunt down women to sexually assault, attack and murder was sickening and terrifying, and the callous way in which they left their victims was unnerving. Their arrests finally meant that Anne Locke's family got some justice for her, even if one of the perpetrators was convicted of the crime. The arrest caused many people to wonder whether John Duffy and David Mulcahy could have been responsible for more unsolved murders across the country, but particularly in and around London, where the two men were known to have attacked other women. Immediately after Mulcahy's conviction, police began looking to see if any other murders or rapes could be linked to the two men. They appealed for any women who may have been attacked by them to come forward. This must have been a difficult thing for some survivors to do, given how difficult it is to report something like this. When police looked into other murders that the men could possibly have committed, one of the names that came up was that of Jenny Ronaldson. Jenny's murder had occurred earlier than their other murders, however the way in which she'd been attacked and killed was very similar to the other Duffy and Mulcahy victims. She had been bound, gagged, beaten, and was found just wearing her bra. She had also been raped. She was also found in water, which is how they found Alison Day 5 years later. Nothing appears to have been discovered, however, to definitively link Jenny Ronaldson to Duffy and Mulcahy, and many of the articles that exist about the police reinvestigating it come from 2001. If Jenny's murder could be linked to them, it would bring up an alarming suggestion that Duffy and Mulcahy were actively attacking and murdering women 5 years before it was thought that they committed their first murder. It has to be said that despite being linked to Duffy and Mulcahy, there is no definitive proof to say it was them, and every other theory for what happens also remains. It's unclear what exactly did happen to Jenny Ronaldson, but what is clear is that she was attacked and killed at some point after she left Guy's Hospital and travelled in the direction of Petticoat Lane. Had she reached her destination? And had this happened afterwards, or had it happened along the way? Jenny was just a normal young woman enjoying her time in London and making the most of her time sightseeing. She was a devoted nurse who was helping people, and she did not deserve to be brutally murdered in this way. Her family also do not deserve the pain that they'd felt all these years not knowing what happened to her and who did it. If you know anything about the murder of Jenny Ronaldson in 1980, then please contact police on 101 and tell them what you know. Any little detail could help solve a crime, no matter how long has passed. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you'd like to support the podcast further, then you can on Patreon and contribute to the exclusive polls to get extra bonus episodes every month. You can also get access to new episodes early and ad-free. I have a backlog of new patrons to shout out, so thank you to Megan, Brent, Kerry, Ashley, Tracy, David, Zoe, Victoria, and Louise. You can use the link in the show notes to visit Patreon and see what we offer. You can also support us by reviewing the podcast wherever you listen, including Spotify, and also just share the episodes. You can subscribe on YouTube and follow us on social media. You can also now subscribe and listen to my new podcast, 10 Minute True Crime, which tells infamous crimes in a short form, bite-sized 10 minutes, for people on the go or who just like the facts. Find that wherever you listen and in the show notes. As always, I'm Caprice, and this has been Unseen.